But if I select an object and then shift select a curve, we'll see the option follow appear. And then we press this. And now when we press play, we'll see the object perfectly follow the curve or path. And it also gets plotted out animation points, so we can use this to control when the path animation starts, how long or fast it goes. Once a path has been used to be an animation path like this, if you click on it alone, you'll see this option say reverse, and so we can press reverse here to reverse that path and get this object to follow it the other way, like this. In the same way, we can have our camera move to any different path we create via this menu here. If we just press follow path again, we can do the same thing with whatever object. So if I were to double right click over here and say add a circle, press S to scale this. If I wanted the cube to be following the circle, I would just select the cube, then shift select the circle, press follow, and now the object will be following the circle. So a few things are done when this happens. First, the path or curve or whatever it is we're using to follow gets this nice animation path title if you haven't already named it something yourself. So if, say ahead of time you create this circle and then you name it some special name, that won't be overwritten. But if it just has its default name when you say Shift A and then created it and you press follow, it will be given this titles to help us stay a bit more organized. Also, keyframes are automatically generated from wherever the cursor happens to be to the end of the animation. We don't have really anything animated other than these curves, but say we had a character or objects moving around and say the animation went out to say 12 seconds. If we had a press cube and then clicked on the circle and then pressed follow, the animation would have been generated between wherever the cursor happened to be and the end of the last keyframe of the animation. But if there's no animation, you'll just get default 4 seconds here. Of course, you can bring these frames closer together to speed this up, or you could, bring them farther away to slow it down. I'll right click here to get my timeline to snap. Select this, press G to grab, and then just let go of it there so it'll snap back. You can also press S to scale and then immediately enter in a number for the amount of times you want the scaling to be multiplied. So right now this is 4 second long, but if I shift select all the frames involved here and I bring my cursor back to 0 because the keyframes will scale from the location of the cursor, and say I wanted this to be exactly twice as long, so 8 seconds instead of 4, I would press S and then 2, and Blender takes that to mean, okay, scale this times 2, and then so this will be taking twice as long now. If I wanted to cut this in half, I would press S and then 0.5, which means half of 1 basically, and then it scales back to what it was. If I wanted to scale this by half again, I could press S 0.5, and that would scale it down like that. So the actual animated keyframes exist in the curve's properties. So here we have this animation path 0.002, which we could go ahead and double click on this and rename it something more meaningful, such as animation path circle, because it's a little more descriptive for us. But the keyframes that are generated are actually added from properties, and we can get to the properties of this curve that we have selected by clicking this curve button here in our properties panel whenever we have a curve or path selected. See, it's here when we have one of these curves or paths selected, but if I were to click on, say, a mesh object, don't have that option anymore. But anyway, so what's actually animated here is this evaluation time. If we look at these two yellow highlighted keyframes and we right click to drag our cursor down to the last one, you'll see that the total amount of frames this is being animated is 120 frames, which basically turns out to be 4 seconds. Basically, all this is saying is that one full from beginning to end journey of this path is going to be this many frames. So if the last keyframe we're on is at 120, that means it's going to do one loop. But if, say, we wanted this to go around twice or more than that, we could change this evaluation time from 120 to, say, twice that of 240 with the indicator on the last keyframe here. If I click here and enter 240 and hit enter, And then you want to press I over any yellow or orange highlighted property to enter a keyframe for it. So when we pressed I after adding 240, this keyframe here was overwritten with this new value. So now if we press back and press play, we'll see this go around twice before it comes to the end, because 120 frames is what we have this set to mean one full from beginning to end of the path. And since we're using twice that means it'll go around it twice. I'm gonna go ahead and scale this timeout. So if I press S to scale and enter 2 to scale it to twice the length, the beauty of this is we can still at any time reverse the animation of this, and all of our animating work that we did, like setting all this stuff up and everything, stays in place, only the object will be following the path in reverse, which is pretty sweet. So if a curve isn't naturally complete like this circle is, we can actually get it to do so. So we had this curve over here we were using, and if we wanted this cube to follow this again, all we would do is select the object we want to follow, then shift select the curve. We'll see that follow option come up again, press it, and now when we press play, we see the cube following this path again. When we created this, we didn't really create it to be a full loop here, but we can easily fake that. All we do over here under active spline where it says cyclic, which means like circle-ish, you can sort of think as, we click this, and now this curve will be automatically finished to complete. So if we press play, we'll see this do a full circle from beginning to end. And once again, we could make this go more times by increasing this value. So I could right click to where the last keyframe of this particular animation path is, that's highlighted here. And we could increase this to say 240, which would be twice of 120, which means it will go around this thing twice in that amount of time. And then of course we want to tap I over this highlighted value to make sure that the keyframe is overwritten for it. Press back, press play. And then that same amount of time we'll see it go 2 loops instead. So you might be wondering, well, is there a way to get another object to follow on the same path behind it? And yes, there is. It's really easy. Say you had another object, so we could press Shift A, add a monkey or something, but say you had, anything. All you do is, once again, you want to select the object and shift select the path you want it to follow and press follow. You'll notice this gets moved, but we could press reverse again for that. Now if we press play, the object will be following as well. Only it's right on top of each other, which is not what we really want. So to get it to lag a little bit behind, all we do is select the object that we want behind. Notice here on our constraints tab of the properties panel here, this follow path, which this was added when we pressed follow here. And notice this offset value. So all you have to do is increase this offset value a bit like this, and you press play. And so now the monkey is following the cube, and it's also doing it super fast. So let's press S to scale this out, press 2 to scale out that animation times 2 to slow it down a bit. And so there you go. We could actually move this cube anywhere we wanted along this path by selecting it and adjusting its offset value, so we can change the position of where these things, start and end and what have you. One thing I'll mention is that to make things easier on yourself, whenever you're modeling things or creating things, planning to do this, it's good to design them within the same orientation. So what I mean by that is basically, okay, so I'll press Shift C to recenter my 3D cursor. Say I had like this object here, I'll press Tab to go into edit mode, and say it was some kind of vehicle or something, and say this was the front of the vehicle, and this was the back, or something like this. And say I had planned on making something else to go behind it. Whatever I planned on making to go behind it, I would want to make it in the same orientation. Basically, they're facing the same direction. So I would want to keep that in mind when designing the other vehicle to make things, easily work together. So if say I were to click here and then shift select this path, I could press follow, and then select this other object and shift select that path and press follow. And so now they're all on there, but they're all like really, close up to each other, which is not good. So we would want to click this object and then adjust its offset, which these objects are way too big for this tiny path, but I think you get the basic picture here. And maybe put this one behind. This one would have to go a bit further behind. Now if we press back, press play, They'll all be moving along, going on their merry way. So that's super, super awesome. So finally, to cross our T's and dot our I's, I said it's a good idea to create everything within the same orientation, basically facing the same direction whenever you're making this stuff that you're going to put on a curve like this. But you can also adjust the way that it faces the curve with these values, only it can be a bit confusing, and it's just a lot easier to just build everything in mind ahead of time. So for instance, we could change this facing to Y, which would make it face the other direction. So that basically just flips it around there. And or we could have this negative Z, but then you would want to change this up value to Y. If you have a Z value in the forward facing, then the up facing value has to be Y, and vice versa. If it's Y here, it has to be Z there, or it won't work. And so in this sense, you can change the direction. But it's a lot easier to just plan for this stuff ahead of time, so you're not having to deal with this for each individual object that you add to this path.